With a smile, somebody said to me as they came in, well, if we sit according to our mental health, those that are really doing well sit in the front row. I said, we're all going to be in the parking lot. This is a timely subject indeed. The seminar is titled Hope for the Hurting. And so we are glad that you're here, perhaps for yourself, perhaps for family, friends, neighbors, co-workers, or just to understand what's happening in our world today. My name is Rick Marshall. I'm the senior pastor, and on behalf of our leadership team, I welcome you. I particularly want to honor Jennifer White, who had a vision for this many, many months ago, along with our deaconesses and the leading women in our church and our elders and deacons. We thought this was a timely seminar that we are proud to host. And so after Phil's first presentation, she will come and deal with a lot of sort of like issues and Q&A issues and materials and things that will facilitate the second half of our seminar today. Since the early days of the third millennium, we've all faced a world full of terror. And then came the fires and the floods and a wave of technology. What I have in my back pocket shows an apple with a bite out of it. That came into the world in 2007. We are literally in the middle of a laboratory that has produced some devastating results. Some positivity for sure, but I'm not sure how that measures out in balance. And then the instability of our economy and global politics, and the anxiety and the illness that was exposed by a pandemic. It revealed how sick we were before we started to become very ill. And so it's impossible to imagine that there isn't anyone in this room, myself included, that doesn't need to be here today. I discovered a word that described myself as a human being, as a father, a grandfather, a husband, and a pastor. Somebody said, it sounds to me like you're languishing. And so I looked it up. And I was, and I am. But then I found that in the Bible, the word appears 7 times. In Jeremiah 31:25, God spoke to his servant and to my heart as well. For I will satisfy the weary soul, and every languishing soul I will replenish. God has raised up all of you as caregivers and friends to help the weary and the broken. But he has especially gifted people like Phil Monroe, well-trained, tons of experience, way more that he could share with us than it would take days of time to interact. And so we are here today to hear from him in the specificity of what God has laid upon his heart. There's lots of materials that Jennifer will tell you about. But he's been well described in the flyer, well trained, and he'll tell you more about himself, I'm sure. But he comes to us as somebody who's in the greater Philadelphia area, so he knows the community, and he knows the human heart. So let me pray for him, and then we're going to welcome him and turn it over to Phil Monroe. Our Father God, I thank you for every person here, the way that you have led in this seminar from start to finish. Even thank you for a clear day. And we pray, God, that there would be clarity today in our minds and hearts for the things that we need to understand. We need your help. We need your love. We need your grace. We need your healing. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's welcome Phil Monroe. Phil, come.
Thank you. I think, actually, Rick read my first paragraphs and took all my thunder, so I'm going to have to adjust. No. So let me just continue with his thought, and then it'll take just a minute, and we will then lay the groundwork for what we're going to do today. But to add to his thought, he's not wrong. We live in a very technologically connected world. If you're on Instagram, then you see lots of pictures of beauty and connection, and it can make you actually feel both good and alone, because you're seeing a curated picture of what somebody says their life is like. And it rarely is anything but lovely. Of course, the technology can give us a blow-by-blow, minute-by-minute sense of the doom that awaits you in the next 5 minutes. Twitter. Twitter is wonderful if you need to know what's happening and why was the ground shaking beneath your feet. Because if you can just go to Twitter, somebody's already beat you to it and said what happened. We had an earthquake and da-da-da, right? And it can also tell you how the world is going to end in the next 5 seconds. We call it doom scrolling. Technology is wonderful, beautiful, connective. We know things about the world that we wouldn't know, and we feel even more alone. There's a fair amount of research that's been going on about this languishing that he was talking about. The World Health Organization, even before the pandemic, was noticing that a quarter of us at any one time experience something that might be labeled a mental illness. So a quarter of us, we could divide the room up. He was talking about the front and the back, but we don't have to do that. Let's just imagine, look around right now. If a quarter of us right now are suffering with some diagnosis or with some symptoms that are really making our life painful, that's a lot of people who are hurting in our churches, isn't it? This number doesn't seem to be just out there in the world and we in the church are somehow protected. It's, no respecter of persons. We all suffer. The American Bible Society, where I used to work and still do a little bit, did its own research. And they found that 50% of Americans will suffer a traumatic event in their lifetime. Leading causes of these traumatic events are sudden death of a loved one, loss of job or career, being fired. And this also was research that happened before the pandemic got underway. During the pandemic, we saw a lot of the research about languishing, increasing calls to distress lines like for 911 and other kinds of things, for suicide hotlines, increasing in despair. But you know what's interesting? The despair quotient has gone up even after the pandemic has waned. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but you can hold on in a difficult time. And when difficulty relents a little bit, that's when we crash. If you've been caregiving for somebody who was ill, and you thought they might not make it, and you gave 24/7 care for them, when do people get sick? They don't get sick, caregivers don't get sick during that time so much, it's afterwards when the pressure is off, and then my body collapses. So, the pandemic has waned some. It's not gone. Our lives have been changed for it, and usually not for the better. But now is where we're seeing greater levels of despair, suicide ideation, thinking, and actions. We're in a world of hurt. The question is, how do we talk about it? How do we examine it? I'm going to ask you today to go on a journey with me. This journey has several parts, and because we're in such a beautiful area, imagine that we're in this big bus, and we're getting ready to go on a journey together, and I'll try to be your guide and tell you some of the sights that we're going to see out the window. And by the way, if I get boring, look out the window. That's going to be good for your mental health. Seeing beautiful things is one of those things you can do. So if you need to, for various reasons, yes, because I'm boring, or because you're overwhelmed, get up, walk around, go find the bathroom, get a snack. This is perfectly fine and good. the last thing we would want is for you to sit someplace where you're overwhelmed. Take a break. This journey we're going to go on in this bus, we will take breaks. We'll stop. We'll look at our GPS map, see where we're headed. We'll stop, take bathroom breaks, literally, but also figuratively. I'm going to have some places where you're going to get up and stretch. You're going to do some activities. The stretch might not be actually getting out of your seat, but turning to your neighbor and having a conversation. Don't worry, you're not going to be asked to reveal your deep, dark secrets. If you want to, that's on you. So we'll stop, we'll take a look at the vistas, we'll see where we're at, but the journey we are on is to try to understand, Lord, what do I do with my vulnerable emotions, with my hurt? Most of us feel shame over our difficult emotions. We hide them, we protect them. Notice that Sunday morning doesn't have a lot of crying people. I mean, we can, we do, we see it. It should be normal. But we do a lot of smiling on Sunday mornings. Maybe it's time for us to take some of those smiles off and just talk about the pain we have in our hearts. Some of that pain is our own. Some of that pain is for our burden for someone else who's suffering. So if you're here today, I'm not assuming the pain you carry is your own. Maybe you carry it for the world. I see in the back you've got boxes for Ukraine. You're probably carrying the tears of Ukraine here as you're thinking about the needs of this country. I know you have friends and family who are hurting, and you want to know how to help. So that's what our journey is all about. So along the way, there may be places where you want to have us take a diverging path, a rabbit trail. That's what the Q&A is for, I believe, and later at the break, Jennifer will give you this instructions, but you'll be able to write questions down, and we will then be able to look at those questions and be able to answer them at the last section of what we're doing. Okay, are you with me so far? Good. Well, this journey we're on needs some explanation first, right? It needs really a sense of where we're headed and why we are here. But when you go on a journey, you need to remember to take some things with you. One of my friends in the back has gone on some international journeys with me, and she can tell you that I've forgotten a lot of things. Like my glasses, my wallet, a belt. I don't know, how can I forget these things? So I want you to bring 2 items with you on this journey today. Curiosity and compassion. One of the things that happens when we start talking about vulnerable, painful emotions and feelings and struggles that we might be having in our lives and our relationships is that we feel a lot of shame. That's not going to help us too much today. So in order for us to go on this journey, we need to remember curiosity and compassion and have them in our hands. What do I mean by this? Curiosity. I want to understand how I function, how other people function. Not in some sort of curiosity like you're at a zoo and you're looking at this weird animal, but more like you're looking at a beautiful painting, a sculpture, and you want to know how the artist made it. You're interested in the story behind it. What led to this particular piece of work, this piece of art, this work? Because I'm telling you, that's what you all are. You are pieces of art. We know this. Your theology teaches you this. You are made in the image of God. And so you are reflecting His beauty. Yes, we are humans. We are frail. We have issues. But we need to start with the curiosity about what we're seeing, why we're seeing, what it might tell us. We are quick to be a judging people. Now, judgment is not wrong. Assessment is not wrong. But it isn't always helpful to be your first step, because we usually then come with our biases, and our predetermined answers. Right? So, let's imagine we're curious along the way, what we're going to see about emotions, what we're going to see about the pain in people's heart. When we talk about anxiety or depression or obsessive-compulsive disorder or addiction or any other particular problem, let's have curiosity. And let's also have compassion. If you're here today and you've been walking with somebody, you might be really frustrated. You might be really irritated with how their problems are affecting you. It happens. We're not surprised. Life is difficult. People can be difficult. And we have feelings about it. That's okay. But today, let's have compassion. Let's have compassion for ourselves. One of the hardest things, I think, for us Christians to do is to have self-compassion. I'm a pastor's kid. I grew up in the church. I was in the church before I was born. And I've been in the church ever since. And one of the things that I see in the church is a lot of self-hatred. And a lot of that even sort of bleeds out to beliefs that we have that God has for us. Like, God is kind of irritated with us. He is nearly done with us. Maybe he'll let us in the back door. Maybe because we said the magic words. Maybe whatever, he's got to be kind and gracious to us, but he really doesn't want to. He's kind of fed up with us. It's kind of worm theology, we call it. Such a worm as I. And there's a place where we understand this is why we fall down in the presence of God, why Isaiah hits the dirt when God comes near, because of holiness. But it's not because God is mad at you, mad at him. So, curiosity and compassion. Can we bring these with us? We need them. Okay, with that, I want to start with a Bible passage. I think that's only appropriate. So, 1 Kings chapter 19. If you have your Apple with a bite-out Bible, digital Bible, go ahead and open it if you want. 1 Kings chapter 19. I'm not going to read all of this, but I think it's helpful for us to situate ourselves to ask this question, which is, remember, we're on a journey, but we need perspective. I don't know about you, but GPS only gives you the next turn. I want to know where I'm going. I need a map. I need to see the big picture. So this is, I hope, going to give you the big picture. Before we look at chapter 19, though, let's consider what happened in 18. We're about to get to the Super Bowl. We'll find out if your team is in it. My team isn't, but that's another story. And don't worry, it's not Dallas. It might be worse, so we'll leave it there. Elijah just had the Super Bowl of Super Bowls. He went up against 400 prophets of Baal on a mountaintop, and he called them to have a competition. You call on your God, and if he brings fire from heaven and burns up your sacrifice, then Baal's God. But if my God answers, then I win and you lose. So, of course, Baal's prophets try this. They go nuts. They cut themselves. They cry out. They do everything. And in good competitive fashion, Elijah does what? He decides to do a little taunt. So, I guess your God's in the bathroom, huh? Maybe you went on vacation. Is he asleep? Come on. And of course, they go nuts. They cut themselves. They do all sorts of things. It doesn't work. He thinks, I think I need to up the ante here because I need to make sure they know there's no cheating. So he gets the cameras on so there's no way of cheating, and he dumps water all over this thing. There's no spark. He's got no little lighter, a little bic here to flick it and see if he can fool anybody. He makes sure they know if fire comes, it's not me. And God answers. Huge win. Prophets are killed. Elijah's the victor. Remember, this is during a drought as well. No rain. he calls for God to bring rain. Rain comes. You can't have a bigger spiritual win than this. Well, not everybody's happy. What happens in 19? Ahab, the king, told Jezebel, the queen, all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, so may the gods do to me and even more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow. You're going to die by tomorrow. I mean, Elijah has God on his side. What does he care? He's protected, right? Wrong. Read what happens next. Then he was afraid, and he rose and he ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and he left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, it is enough now, Lord. Take my life, for I am no better than my father's. And he lay down and slept under the broom tree. Stop there. This man who has seen the hand of God more clearly than almost any one of us here, probably all of us put together even, ran for his life. He didn't just run for like 5 minutes. This would be like running from central New Jersey to Philadelphia, or even longer. He ran a long time. He didn't just like run for a little bit and like, oh yeah, I shouldn't probably do that. God's probably with me. Let me talk to him. He ran. And then he didn't want to be around anybody. He ran further into the desert because he knew if God doesn't take me, the desert will. There's no water in this area. Elijah had a trauma response. This is what happens. Life flashes before your eyes. Things are bad. You run. You want to die. Interesting words he says here. I'm no better than my fathers. He may be having a shame response. He may have thought he was better than his forefathers. Seems kind of like a shame response to me. What do you think God's thinking? He must be irritated. Man, I showed up for you just yesterday. What are you doing? Get back out there. Where's your faith? What do I have to do? Yeah, maybe you should die. Does he give him a lecture? Beat him up? Tell him to knock it off? He shouldn't feel that way? Try to tell him that everything's good? No. Look what he does. And he lay down and slept under the broom tree. And behold, an angel, from the Lord, of course, touched him and said, arise and eat. And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate, and he drank, and he lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you. And he arose and he ate and drank, and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. What did God do? He took care of him. The first thing he did is thought about food, water, and sleep. He provided for him. We have mercy ministries in our church, right? You have diaconal ministries. That's what this is all about. The deacon came, the deaconess came and gave Elijah what God wanted him to have. He cared for him. No slap therapy here, which is what we often want to do to people who we think aren't, are getting weak in the knees. He cares for him. There's no sermon. There's no rebuke. But he sends him on a journey. Have you ever gone on a journey? I've never gone on a journey for 40 days, but I have gone hiking before. What do you have to do on a journey when you're going on a path that you haven't seen before? You have to kind of keep alert. And if you're here, you're going to be alert to things like snakes and scorpions, and making sure you don't step on thorns, and walking and finding shade, and probably finding a place to sleep where, bugs aren't going to get on you. I don't know what he did, but your attention is now entirely on making sure you don't slip and fall, right? That you're going to walk and you're going to keep going, step after step after step. What did Elijah need? He needed a journey. He needed something to go on, probably to take his mind off of everything else that had happened. He needed simple tasks. A journey in some ways is very simple, one step after another step. And where did he bring him? To Horeb. Where is Horeb? This is Mount Sinai. This is where God has given his word before. So he's bringing him to the source. He's bringing him to a physical representation of the source. What happens here? Then he came to a cave and lodged in it, and behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" As if God didn't know. I think he knew. He said, "Well," and this is Elijah's answer, "I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars. I've done all these things. They've killed your prophets with the sword, and I am the only one left, and they seek my life to take it away." So basically he goes on a rant. I've done everything, and I'm the only one left. He's not even telling the truth, as we'll see later. It's his truth. It's what he thinks is true. What does God say? Does he correct him at this point? No. He actually says, "Go out. Stand on the mountain before the Lord." And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great strong wind that tore the mountains and broke it into pieces, the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. And the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. And Elijah heard it and wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And guess what? God asked him the same question. What are you doing here? And Elijah gives the same answer. It's not like, oh, I just got an aha moment and I now know why I'm here. He's still stuck. Maybe you felt this way. Somebody asks you how you're doing and you give the same answer. You think, why am I still talking about this? It's the same thing. But God is interested in what Elijah has to say. He says the same thing. And then God says, "Go. I've got a new task for you to do. A new calling. Return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. Jehu the son of Nimshi you shall anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha the son of Shaphat, I won't be able to say his name, you shall anoint to be the prophet in your place. And the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death, and the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha put to death. And yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all knees that have not bowed to Baal." There's no sermon here. God doesn't correct him. He just says, I've got something for you to do. And you're not going to be alone because I'm helping you raise up other people who will take the mantle for you. Literally, Elisha carries the mantle of Elijah, right? So, why am I telling you this story? Remember, we're getting on this journey and we want to see where we're headed. What does God's care look like for hurting people? For people who are confused, overwhelmed, emotional, ranting, repetitious. He asks gentle questions. He takes care of physical needs. And he gives them something to do. Maybe you've experienced this. You've lost somebody. You've been in the grief journey. And in that grief journey, you're going through the motions and you're numb and you can't figure out how to do the most basic things. And someone comes along and they say, "Here, eat this." And you eat it. You don't even taste it. "Here, let's go get this. Here, let's do this little task." And you realize that was an act of love. You didn't need a sermon. You didn't need a counseling session. You didn't need to be told to buck up, buttercup, let's go, right? What did you need? You just need someone to care for you. That's the picture I want you to have as we talk about hard things today. This is your God who knows you who provides for you. And we, his people, are to be his hands and feet, doing this kind of provision as well. So, keep that in mind as we walk on this journey. And ask yourself, is this the kind of care I have received? Is this the kind of care I give when I'm with somebody who's hurting and has a rant of a question? We'll look at this. We're going to come back to the scriptures. We're going to look at lament psalms. I'm not sure if you're familiar with lament psalms, but if you are, that's great. But if you're not, we're going to look at the fact that God ordains our ranting complaints and has given us permission to share them with him. We'll try writing our own few lines as well. Elijah, you might think, is, well, this is an anomaly. But I actually ask you to think about the story of Jonah. Jonah kind of gets a bad rap, but he was asked to go to minister to people who wanted him to die too. So no wonder that he ran. And at the end, when the people that wanted him to die were getting grace and mercy, it made him really upset. But what do you notice about God? He comes to him and says, Jonah, do you have a right to be angry? He talks to him. He asks him questions. How about John the Baptist? John the Baptist knew who Jesus was before he was even born. He leapt in the womb. He had the opportunity to baptize the Savior of the world and see the Holy Spirit come on upon him like a dove. And yet, in his weakest, darkest moment, he's sending a message to Jesus. Were you the one? Or should we consider another? This can't be right. He's confused. Maybe he's angry. I did a lot of things for God. And why am I here about to lose my head? We notice that God seems to care for these questions. It's not an anomaly. So, on this journey, our first stop is one where we look at emotions. Maybe you've heard this phrase and said to you, or you've said it, "You're so emotional." Doesn't sound like a nice thing to say or be said to, right? What's behind that? You're such a drama queen. You're so, something. And usually what that reveals is the person is bothered by these emotions and doesn't want them there. So I think we need to step back, and on our first stop on this journey is to stop and look at what are emotions and to see their beauty. I'm in the Reformed world like you all are. If you're in a Presbyterian church, you're in the Reformed world, and we know a lot about total depravity. But I think sometimes we get this idea wrong. The idea is that everything about us all the time is always bad. That's not the intention of this. If you reflect the beauty of God, and if your emotions reflect the beauty of God, then they reveal something about him. They reflect him. So let's look at the beauty of emotions. What are they there for? Emotions are primarily something that we experience in relationship with something else. They express our heart and our experience in relationship. You can have your own emotions in your closet because you're having emotions with something that you're thinking about. But let's just for a moment think about the most beautiful place in the world you've ever been. You're looking out a vista. Maybe it's the Grand Canyon and your mouth drops open. You've seen pictures and now you've seen it in real life, and the vastness of it just makes you feel small. Maybe it's the ocean. Maybe it's the mountains. Maybe it's a rushing river. Maybe it's the woods that you're looking out here. And you are just captured. You stop and you're just taking it in. You are having an emotion of beauty. Maybe it brings you to tears. Maybe it just makes you smile. Maybe some of you, it's not the natural world, but music And music just arrests you, stops you, and you just feel it. Again, brought to tears, brought to smiles, joy. You want to share it with somebody else. This is how we respond. It's happiness, it's joy, it's lightness, it's, you name it. It's just sometimes undescribable, right? These are reflections. You would not be a very nice, good person if you did not have emotions. Imagine going through the world as Spock, for those of you who are of a different generation. Imagine, if you need a newer one, imagine going through the world where you only had joy and you couldn't have anything else. I was trying to think about this last night about different movies, and I don't know if you've seen The Hunger Games, but in The Hunger Games, the people of the capital seem to only be able to be bubbly and happy, and even when they're seeing misery, they're still expressing it and don't seem to be connected to the real world. Emotions that have been given to us by God are about relationships. And our relationship to the world, guess what? His emotions are about relationships. Have you thought about this? God expresses jealousy. He is a jealous God. He expresses angst. What am I going to do with you, Israel? I'd get rid of you if I could, but I can't. If a mother could forget her children, maybe that's possible, but probably not. But I could not forget you. Hear the emotion in that. Hear the joy in, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear the joy. Hear the heartache. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I long to gather you as a hen gathers her chicks, but you would not let me. Hear the pain. Could you not wait with me, watch with me for 1 hour? Hear the abandonment. My God, why have you forsaken me? These emotions are beautiful examples of the character and person of our God. And when you have them, you are also reflecting something true about God. Remember, I said, I want you to bring on curiosity and compassion. This is the most essential place that we bring these out, because we're so often denigrating our emotions. We're so often denigrating our expression of feelings. Emotions tell us important things about ourselves and our place in the world. They may not always be true. They may not always be right. They may not always be complete. We may need other people's help in this, but they should not be shut down. But unfortunately, we've been taught a lot of times, stop crying. What's wrong with you? Buck up. Don't feel that way. Even nice people saying, I don't want you to feel that way. Come on, don't feel that way. Be happy, right? And when we slice off our emotions, we end up slicing ourselves off of relationships with ourselves and the world. We cut off parts of ourselves. We lose a connection to God even when we do this. And you can't, by the way, just cut off one emotion and think all the rest will be okay. Like, I just can't be angry. I can be all the rest. I can't be angry. That's not really going to be possible. If you numb anger, you'll numb everything. Now, I know you came here probably wanting to talk about what can we do with our vulnerable, painful emotions, and we'll get there, I promise. We're on the journey. We're going at 55 miles an hour, not 75. And we need bathroom breaks, right? We'll join back up when we're thinking about emotions later in the second talk that I do, when we start talking about the more vulnerable emotions. When we look at the Psalms, a third of the Psalms are lament psalms. More psalms of angst and pain than songs of joy. And these psalms we often read by ourselves, but they're really designed to be read in a community and expressed in a community. What if our emotions were expressed in a community like this. They're beautiful. So, we're going to take our first bathroom break, not literally, by the way, unless you have to. But I want you to now take that image we saw of God's care for Elijah and his concern for emotions and making space for the beauty of Elijah's emotions without squashing them down and telling him no. And I want you to try to provide that for each other. We're going to do a little exercise. So, remember I said it's going to be interactive? Well, I've got a little task for you to do. But to set it up, I want to tell you to give you some background. You all, at some point in your life, have been hurting, and there is somebody who asked you what the matter was, right? And you started to tell. And I bet right now you can think of two examples. One example where somebody didn't treat you well in that moment, and one example where you felt really listened to, heard, cared for. So, I'll be silent for a second. See if you can get those two experiences in your mind right now. The one where you weren't cared for. The one where you felt affirmed, cared for, loved. Got them? All right. Now, the question is, what characteristics of the person who was less likely to be caring for you, who didn't do a good job? In fact, let's shout out a few things. This is going to be interactive here. What are some of the characteristics of somebody who's not a particularly very good listener? What did you... Angry? Look. Talk over you, that's right. Remember the one where, I'm starting to tell you my problem. Oh, yeah, I had a problem too, and they go off, and it's all about them. It's like, wait. What happened, right? Judgmental. Dismissive, yes. Self-centered. Impatient. Doesn't have enough time. Distracted. Fix you, yes. Let me fix you. Let me get in there and tinker. Narcissistic, self-centered, right. Egocentric. Okay, quick. What about the good side? What were some of the characteristics of a listener who was one that you felt really cared for? Compassionate. Warm. Patient. Gentle. Kind. Good listener. That means they didn't look at their watch. They weren't distracted by their phone. They didn't just passively listen. They heard you. You know you're being heard. There's one back here. Loving, yeah. Eyeball to eyeball. Looking at you. Present. Making you feel special, right? Didn't give advice right away or try to give advice. That's right. Great. Okay, keep those in mind because now you have to be the good listener. We're going to take 20 minutes actually out of our time right now to do this. And what I'm going to ask you to do, pair up if you can. If you have to be in threes, that's not really ideal. So if you have to move a little bit to find somebody else, do this. We're going to take 10 minutes each. For 10 minutes, you're going to be a listener. And then for 10 minutes, you're going to be a speaker. Now, you don't have to share something that's really painful. But you might want to share something that's irritating. Maybe on your way here today, there was a driver who was driving 10 miles an hour and you tried to get around them and you couldn't get there. Something as simple as irritating as that's not really life-altering, but you just want to share it. Maybe you were standing in the cashier's line and you got to the front and then they said, oh no, we're turning this off. You have to get another line. Something that's frustrating, something that's a little bothersome. And just start to share about it. Listeners, you have 3 questions that you can utilize. You don't have to actually use them, but they kind of guide your mind, right? Well, you're thinking, they're already going to tell you this, the first one anyway. What happened? You're hearing what happened. How did that make you feel? You're actually going to ask about a feeling question. And here's this, maybe the surprising one. What was the hardest part? What happened? How did that make you feel? What was the hardest part? So, listener, utilize those as your ways. 10 minutes, I'm going to put a timer on, and when I say, so don't go out of the room if you can, but I want you to then switch, and listeners become talkers, and talkers become listeners. Okay? Can we do this? And then we'll take a minute or two to find out what that was like. All right. I'd be curious to hear on break some of your experiences in this little exercise. I won't take the time to poll you now, but I've done this many places, and you will find that some people find the 10 minutes to feel like an hour. I don't know what to say after 2 minutes. I felt an urgency to give a comment, even though I know I don't want, that's not what I'm supposed to do. I still felt the urgency to do that. Others feel like the 10 minutes went by in 1 minute, and wait, we just got started. And I'm just so curious, and we have a range of responses. And by the way, this little experiment, maybe it was just nothing for you. That's okay. It doesn't have to produce some big aha moment. One time I did this, and I actually did it in my own church, and it was a mother and a daughter who talked to each other for the 10 minutes, and they said, "We don't think we've talked like this before." And it wasn't because they didn't have a relationship, but to stop and just have that curious moment of listening is a rare thing. And it is rare in this life where we're very frenetic and hectic lives and we're moving on and we're getting from thing to thing. But I'm curious also, what was it like to be listened to? Sometimes when we're listened to, we find ourselves saying things that we didn't even know we were going to say. We find feelings that we didn't know we felt. We have aha moments. This is the beauty of the work that we do in counseling is you think counselors are where we go to the experts and they tell us what to do. Well, maybe sometimes, but generally speaking, a good counseling session is where you're talking and you're reflecting on your life and realizing some things and coming to awarenesses that you might not have had before. So, all of this might feel like very preliminary in our talk, and we're only got a little bit left in our first session here, but this is the foundation, this is the framework of all that we're going to talk about with what do I do with my painful emotions? If we can't have compassion and curiosity and space and knowledge for how to listen to each other, to be heard, to be able to share, then whatever I say next probably won't be all that helpful, right? Because fear and aloneness and shame and hurt will be buried so deeply that we won't be able to access it. But the truth is, there is some practical things we can do and awarenesses we can have with our painful emotions. And that's what I want to talk to you now before the break. You can see in your outline on the first page, practical helps is where we're at in case you want to look at that. And we're going to do a flyby. This is one of those, you're in the tour bus and you're looking out the window, and there might be things that you want to take a picture of, write down a question, and then ask later because you want us to circle back and talk more about that. Go ahead. But the reality is we do live in a fallen world, right? Where we struggle with things that are not the way they're supposed to be, either in us or in our relationships in our world. And they hurt us, and there's a great deal of pain in the world. We struggle with insatiable desires, and some of those become addictions. We struggle with feelings of anxiety, panic, and fear. We struggle with rage, anger, and bitterness. We struggle with hopelessness, depression, and despair. We struggle with attention deficit and distractibility. We struggle with trauma responses, reliving events that are painful that just seem to go on, and we're plagued with repeat questions of why did this happen to me, what's wrong with me, and how can I get out of this hell? We struggle with shame and guilt, false shame, false guilt, and we can't tell the difference. We struggle with distrust and betrayal. If you're feeling these, you're not alone. The question I want you to sit with, that compassionate, curious question is, what does faith look like when I'm having a panic attack? What does faith and fear look like? What does faith and despair look like? What does faith and desire look like? We often think of these things as opposites, but they're not. And the scriptures teach us this. We feel and we have faith. You know, we are probably a lot more compassionate with what we think are physical diseases, you know. You see somebody who has broken a leg, you don't ask them why they're still using crutches. You know, that was 2 days ago. If somebody has diabetes, we don't ask them why they're still taking insulin. If someone has Parkinson's, we don't ask why they use a cane. We don't think shameful thoughts about them, right? Or that they're ashamed for having that problem. We have a lot of respect for them. We don't do so well with our emotional pains, do we? We make a difference between things we think are physical and things we think are just emotional, character issues. The reality is our emotions are part of our physiological body, just like our worship is. You cannot worship God without a physical body, at least here in this world. And your physical body is also involved, and your DNA is involved, and your experiences are involved, and your understandings, right? So what can we do? Well, I have a few points here that I'm going to fly by. The first thing is accepting and validating the emotions that we're having. The last thing that is going to help you is for you to deny your experience. And we see that God spoke to Elijah this way. What's going on, Elijah? Tell me. What's going on, Jonah? Tell me. Right? Validating your emotions does not mean you're agreeing with the emotions of someone else or your own. I once had a young woman coming to me who felt a lot of emotional pain, and her way of solving that pain temporarily was to cut herself. A physical pain seemed much more understandable and acceptable to deal with an emotional pain. As you can imagine, I did not think that was a good thing to do, but accepting and validating meant saying, I can see that you're in a deep well of pain. She felt seen and heard, and that it mattered, that it was an expression of her pain. Of course, I'm thinking in my mind, let's see if we can find some other way to express that pain and address that pain that doesn't cause you this kind of harm. And certainly that's where we went to. But before I could say, stop doing that, you shouldn't, the same thing with somebody who's struggling with feelings of suicide. It needs to be accepted that this is what they're experiencing. So can you accept and validate the pain you experience? It's going to be hard to do anything else if we can't. We struggle with that because we think, I shouldn't feel this way, and we beat ourselves up. But I do. We'll actually look at a psalm later on when we talk about lament psalms, where the psalmist, David, is actually experiencing this. Psalm 42 and 43, which comprise one psalm in the Hebrew Bible. But why are you so downcast? You know, why are you so in despair? Why is your heart crushed? And he does tell himself, put your hope in God, but then he goes right back into it. But I am downcast. And he doesn't give up on the conversation. In fact, it opens him up into a deeper conversation with God, where he has direct questions. Why have you allowed this, God? So, accept and validate. But you're not your feelings. You have feelings, but you're not just your feelings. Sometimes we feel that we're drowning in a feeling that that's all we are. I'm up here speaking, and I should look down, make sure that my fly is up. But I have been places where all of a sudden you look down and you feel a little undressed, some wind blowing that you didn't expect to feel, and you can be overcome with embarrassment. And imagine that everybody is thinking something about you. This is a superficial one, but some of us have had those things where we walk in a room and we feel like everybody's okay except me. and everybody knows that I'm not okay, it's like I'm naked and everybody sees everybody else is dressed and glorious. Right? We have feelings, we are not our feelings. If we could open the windows here, we could have the air blow through. It doesn't stay, it moves through. And our emotions can be this way. How do we do this? You don't force yourself to feel another feeling, but there are ways to be observant and mindful of other things that are also happening. And this is a whole area of psychology and work that's done on mindful life, the ability to attend to the present world around you, what's happening, and not live in reverie. Imagine this. You're washing the dishes, old school. You've got your hands in the soap. You've got your hands in the hot water. You're washing the pot, the pan. But you don't have to think about washing, right? That just comes natural. So your mind is replaying some conversation you had or that you're going to have. You're feeling the anger or the hurt or the bitterness or the betrayal. You're not with the dishes. Now, you don't need, the dishes don't know and they don't care. But can you imagine how you might feel if you actually could just feel the soapy water, touch the things and look at it, put it down? You might find that, in fact, you feel much better. That's being mindful, being present, being in it. We can go through, some of you will drive home after this and you will not remember the route because you were having some other thought in your head. What if we learned how to practice to be present with something? Sometimes it's present with a painful feeling, but sometimes it's present with what's passing by us. Mindful ways, we are not our emotions. We can step back from them. All right, there are ways. There's actually an ancient Christian practice called watchfulness, done in the 1st and 2nd century and beyond that. You know that passage, take every thought captive? I think sometimes we think about that. I need to take it captive. I got to look at it. I have to kind of examine it. I have to fight with it. The early Christians didn't see it that way so much. It was more of an open-handed, Lord, you see, you know my feelings. You know my anger, my bitterness. You see. There was this openness, right? This connection with God to feel our feelings in front of Him. It was a watchfulness, watch and wait kind of idea. Can you do that with the Lord? So you're not grasping them, hanging on, but you, in that acceptance, you are handing them back to God. These are small things. They may not seem like much that you're doing. The next thing that you can do is obviously connect with others. One of the things that from the beginning of sin in the world, we did something. We hid. And we covered up. And we'll talk about this again in the next topic. We'll look and see what God actually does in that. We need connection. One of the things that helps us bring light and truth in our lives is connection, even if we're not getting advice. It's somebody is there, they see me, they know it, they are bearing witness to what's happening in my life, right? So connect with a trusted friend, a confidant, a helper. Yes, it'd be great if this person had the skills to do that, and you may need to choose wisely who your trusted friend is, but you might not be able to find a counselor, but you might be able to find somebody who will just listen. You might have to teach them how to listen, but you can do this, right? Connection. We are designed to be connected. God Himself, the Trinity, is a connected being and connects with us. John 17 is the most beautiful passage of connection. You are in me, I am in you, and they are in us. Over and over, He's repetitious in there. Connection is necessary in our dealing with our painful emotions. Two are better than one, for if one should fall, the other can help them up. And a good friend who can listen can also help us decode our emotions. What is it that I'm actually feeling? Sometimes we don't know. Sometimes, we're okay with, we have a limited vocabulary of feelings. I'm angry, I'm frustrated, and frustrated is what I say for everything. But actually what I am is hurt. alone, abandoned, hopeless, embittered, wounded. Of course, we believe in talking to God, and that's what we'll do more of that in our next session, so I'm not going to say much about that. But talking to God through lament and our tears, bringing our tears to Him, is essential for us to do as we express our emotions. And we find that He does not push us away, but invites us to share even more deeply than we could imagine. And we'll talk in the next talk as well about how that's actually, research has shown that lamenting together helps you recover more quickly. Research done by non-Christians, believe it or not. So, connections with God, connections with others. And finally, I want to just leave you with two more thoughts before we take our break here. One is the 10% rule. When you have been in a difficult place and you're feeling overwhelmed, you just want to not feel that way anymore. I've done a lot of work with people who are struggling with anxiety, OCD, panic attacks, and their often question is there anything we can do that I will not feel this way again? Of course. You feel terrible. You don't want to feel terrible anymore. And at first, the idea of, I might only get 10% this week, that seems so small. It's like saying, we're going to start to climb Everest, but it's going to take you 3 months. But what if we change our view and stop looking at the pinnacle, and we start thinking, what would make this 10% better? I'm struggling with the desire to just eat my feelings and eat. Can I wait 5 minutes before I do that? Does that make it 10% better? Does talking to somebody, looking out, distracting, watching a YouTube video that's on comedy and just makes me laugh a little bit, does that make it 10% better? We often are thinking about this thing that's out of reach that we can't have in the moment right now. You're in an embittered relationship and you know it's going to take years for it to heal. Can you start to imagine, and with that friend, think about what could make it 10% better? And would that be meaningful today, this week? Because if we can start to build 10%, one on top of each other, we're going to start to see hope arise and grow in our hearts. It means changing our goal. It means changing the things that tell us we're starting to move along the way. And what makes your emotions and your experience 10% better will be different than mine, but there are things that are in common that we can do. Part of that 10% better might be this last point, which is being a storyteller. You know, as people of God, we are storytelling people. We're reading constantly from a story that's been written down. And when we read it, we see that God encouraged His people to be storytelling people. Hey, put this pile of rocks here to remind you and your children and your children's children how I brought you through the Red Sea, how I brought you through this. Sometimes the story's not so nice. Remember that pile of rocks? The Achan's under that pile of rocks. To remind you what happens when you're not faithful. But these are Ebenezer's in the old language, stones of remembrance. What else did Israel do? They had festivals and feasts and reminders over and over to remember the work of God. Where did God bring us? Where is He taking us? In Hebrews, we see the retelling of the people of faith, of Abraham, of Isaac, of Jacob, of David, and so many more who were, it says, sawn asunder. Why are this hall of faith recalled to us? So that we can remember. You and I are narrative people. We do tell stories. Think about the stories that you tell when no one's listening. When you're looking in the mirror and you go, I hate myself. You're telling a story. When you are walking away and you just hear in your head, I quit. I can't do this. That may be something that you need to hold to and examine and accept and validate and understand, but it is a story that you're telling. And so, how do we become resilient storytellers, where we start examining other parts of the story? This is not the time to do this when somebody's sad. Let me tell you the story about this is going to be better and God's going to do this wonderful thing. The scriptures say, don't sing songs of praise to people in tears. So know the right time to do this, but examine the narratives. When are we telling the stories of God's goodness and His care in the midst of hard things? What does that look like? How do we do that? Even telling the story of God's people who were hurting and suffering and crying out and complaining to God is a way to tell a narrative. God does want to know your tears. He keeps them in a bottle. He writes them down in His book, Psalm 56, verse 8. So, think about what story you're telling. So these are some very broad brushstrokes as we were flying by, looking out the window, examining things that we can do when we're hurting. We can accept our emotions. We can validate them and recognize that we need people to sit with us, hear what we're experiencing, gently reflect back to us what they are hearing from us, examine them, talk to God about them, find ways to be mindful of the world around us in the midst of our pain. In doing so, we're storytelling people. So, we're about to take an actual bathroom break here. Jennifer will come up. In the next session, what we're going to do is start looking about how do people of faith think about counseling, mental health, and we'll end that session actually examining briefly things like anxiety and depression. How do we think about those things? Maybe we'll have time even to do addiction. And then after that, we'll have another break and a Q&A. So Jennifer, you want to come on up and instruct us?